planned, willful extermination. In that sense, conscious members of the population, targeted population, will flee. This act of deportation then, and there's more, but just as two examples, this act of deportation then, mass forced deportation, can come, at least at this surface level, as an act of direct, as a consequence of direct mass murder, i.e. genocide, or, and I know I'm using those terms interchangeably right now, I probably shouldn't, but it doesn't really matter, mass forced deportation can come as a consequence of extermination on the population or the threat for extermination. Both of those conditions satisfy, they're both individually sufficient to satisfy the condition for mass forced deportation, right? And then obviously what we have is these targeted populations flee to the borders within another state, and hopefully that state will accommodate this population. Now, later I'll talk about sort of the distinction between, I think I do talk about this, right? Yeah, in antiquity, I think I did. Maybe not in this section. I hope I did, because it was a really good discussion. I'll see if I go on, but I talk about later, I think, I remember taking notes on this, on sort of the distinction, the historical transformation in political interpretation of internally displaced people and refugees. And it basically went from a state embracing in antiquity refugees and IDPs because they then contributed to the population, tax revenue, and so on. I hope I talk about this later. To a contemporary interpretation, for the most part, of internally displaced persons and refugees as being parasitic to the host country, right? So, unfortunately, it could be the case that the host country then targets this group again, and this group is again on the run, right? Perpetually on the run, going from state to state to state to state to state, trying to find a place of either cohabitation or inclusion, assimilation, if possible, and so on, right? This becomes an ongoing problem for internally displaced people, and you can imagine what their initiative is, right? Their initiative and what they want to do more than anything else is just go back home, right? We just want to go back where we are from, right? So it's a matter of returning to one's, fatherland, motherland, indigenous community, what have you, right? So very, very, very important discussion. A very unfortunate circumstance, and I think NPR was just talking about a few weeks ago about, I remember hearing something on the drive to work about internally displaced people fleeing some conflict. I don't remember where the conflict was, and the mother gave an account of having I think she had 3 children, her husband was slaughtered in the massacre, and she couldn't manage to bring all the children across, and she had to select between the stronger and the weaker of her child, and she chose to allow the weaker of the child to perish, and she left the child on the road to, I forget where it was that they were going. I mean, brutal decision to make as a parent, right? So again, my whole role in this is to allow this information to be submitted, if you will, to a global cyberspace, so that I can help in raising awareness, and you can be informed as well. We can entertain a discourse. Number 2, ethnic, religious, racial, cultural, social, political violence, right? So I'll just put violence. Violence, etc., right? All these various forms of violence, ethnic violence, religious violence, racial, cultural, social, political violence, right? And the various manifestations that this violence might take. The manifestations that this violence might take, which would then subsequently cause members of a targeted population to flee for their lives, or to be forcibly removed from the confines of their native land, would be, for example, ethnic cleansing. If you want a better distinction between the difference between mass murder and genocide, ethnic cleansing, politicide, and so on, I've already done a series, I think it's a 33, 34 part, maybe 40 part series on genocide. Just go to my main page, type in genocide. I already have a series devoted to sort of making conceptual distinctions between these types of murder, mass murder, as politicide, mass murder as ethnic cleansing, mass murder as mass murder as genocide. All forms of systematic, intentional, willful extermination of human beings, all under different sort of labels, and there are distinctions to be made between the two, despite the fact that in the end all that's being done is people are being slaughtered. Okay, so that would obviously cause, right? If members of a regime are ethnically exterminating or attempting or alleging that they will, or threatening rather, that they're going to ethnically exterminate members of the population, ethnic cleansing is obviously a factor for IDPs, right? Purification, racial purification, right? The argument might be from, it doesn't necessarily have to be genocidal orchestrators, but from an abusive political system might target members of the population because they view that population as being racially inferior, right? And it doesn't have to be just sort of German, Jew, or white, black. You'll have what we in the West might look at two ethnically. You would be wrong to say that, you know, Hutu and Tutsi are ethnically the same, but you look at it just sort of like in a sort of ghetto philosophy mentality. Oh, it's two black people, right? Black people are killing black people, right? Hutu are killing Tutsi, Tutsi are killing Hutu. I don't really see what they see. What's the distinction that they see? You might not see that, right? But there is both an ethnic systematization of extermination, right? So that ethnicity informs the hatred, but also there's sort of remnants of Portuguese discrimination and racial hierarchy crap that was passed down generationally to the population, and this creates conflict, right? It's unfortunate that there still are so many ramifications, negative ramifications of post-colonial and colonialism in much of Africa, but it is, right, this idea of purification. So insofar as we purge these people from the population, we've cleansed the population. And one of the members of my advisory board for the Institute for Genocide Awareness and Applied Research, Martin Shaw, noted, very, very acclaimed genocide scholar, writes what I think is probably one of the best discussions on the concept of cleansing. You know, so this idea of cleansing is that, you know, we are being infected, we are dirtied by their existence. Let's clean ourselves and purge ourselves of this filth. So, sort of in analyzing rhetoric, in analyzing hate speech and warmongering, genocide mongering, you have to be careful to listen for that discourse, because once the discourse starts to talk about filth and dirt, then you recognize that, you know, initially it'll seem sort of mundane, but very quickly that filth and dirt will talk and shift into a discussion of cleansing, and that cleansing only unfolds, ever unfolds, in acts of mass slaughter, genocide. So, huge problem. Next, politicide. Right, sort of, I get really, really technical in, hopefully, you know, what will be, I think, a great contribution, this book on genocidal intent that I've written. It'll be the first of its kind. It's a distinction on exactly, and I don't want to use the technical terms now, but I've made sort of technical, very, very, very technical distinctions between the forms of extermination that unfold in these many different types of mass extermination. Why is genocide different from politicide? Why is politicide different from civil war? How is a civil war different from, you know, so on. So, all of these are manifestations of, and conditions which invariably result in the fleeing of massive amounts of people for their life, or the forced purgation. Now I'll use the technical term now that you understand what it means. The forced purgation of targeted group members. Okay. Next is resource competition. Right? Resource competition is obviously another factor for mass deportation. If a community only has limited amounts of resources for a particular population, and there are warring factions competing